Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest webinar from the Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter. My name is Ian MacArthur, and I'm the Director of the Charter. It's great to have you here this afternoon to talk about restructuring done right. Clearly, over the last 2 years, employers, businesses have been put under a huge amount of pressure. And as they come through the worst of the pandemic, business models may need to be looked at. How organizations are organized may well have to be looked at. And unfortunately, we've seen some organizations perhaps doing this the wrong way. Fire and rehire has been something that's grabbed way too many headlines over the last couple of years. From British Gas to Tesco to recently P&O. We've all seen examples of how not to do this. And we thought good employers need to understand how best to be able to go through restructures to avoid this sort of reputational damage and the impact it would have on employees. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by a great panel of speakers. We have Makin, who's a senior advisor at Acas, Carrie Westwell, who's the Director of People and Culture at Peel Land and Property Group, and great friend of the Charter, Jefcott, a partner at Brabners Solicitors. So without much further ado, I'm going to pass straight to Mark, actually, and ask Mark if he can just outline Acas's position, the guidance that you've produced. I think you produced guidance in November 21, Mark, on how you restructure, and maybe just take us through the basics of that guidance and how it applies to doing restructuring in the right way.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. I think it's worth starting by saying there are a number of ways that contracts and contractual terms can be changed or varied as part of that restructure. And there's many different reasons why employers and indeed employees might want to do that. So from flexibility clauses that might already exist in the contract, through collective agreements if trade unions are recognised, changes with agreement, and then changes without agreement that might be imposed, right the way down to fire and rehire, as you've already mentioned. Whilst it's not unlawful to fire and rehire, you mentioned the Acas guidance that was published in November 21. The message that's very clear through that is that fire and rehire, dismissal and re-engagement should always be seen as a very, very last resort, and all other options should be considered before you get anywhere near that particular process. Whichever method employers decide to use, I think there are some key steps that are outlined in the guidance that it's worth highlighting right from the very, very beginning, where questions that employers really should be asking themselves before they embark on this process. And some very simple questions around what are we trying to achieve by going through this particular process? What is the problem that we are trying to resolve? And then is that contractual change, that variation needed to achieve that particular objective? And weighing up the benefits against the risks of going down that particular route. And I think asking those questions can help employer keep focus. They can order their thoughts. They can get some clarity about what it is that they're trying to achieve. That leads them to automatically thinking about other options, other ways of achieving that original aim. And I think also on the benefits side of this, going through that particular process can also help if they get to the information and consultation stage. So it indicates to employees that they've entered into this with some deep thought before they've got anywhere near the stage that they're at. I think it shows good faith. And when they get there, it shows the reasoning and the logic behind the decisions that they're trying to make. It shows which options have already been considered and ruled out and why they might have been ruled out. And that information is already available to share with the appropriate people at that particular stage. So it can save time and it can help maintain good employment relations. On the sharing of the information, again, lots of guidance in the Acas best practice approach, but key message is share that information early and transparently. Don't hide behind confidentiality when there's no need to hide behind confidentiality. Think about what information needs to be shared and who that information needs to be shared with. So if we recognise trade unions, chances are we'll be going through the trade union officials and the reps. Do other employee representative forums exist? What are their constitutions? Are they geared up and equipped to handle that type of consultation? Or are we going to be speaking to individual employees? So not just what it is, but who we will be speaking to. And again, lots of benefits of planning that and getting that process right at the beginning. It shows that other options have been considered. It gives everyone time to assimilate that information, consider what it means for them, and think about how they're likely to respond. It underlines that good faith, and it gives employees a voice, and it encourages them to air their concerns, their fears, maybe their objections, but also their ideas and their suggestions, which may have been missed. Don't forget consultation. Lots of good practical advice on the Acas website about how to effectively and meaningfully consult. But again, there are some key principles behind that. And similar to sharing information, start early. Seek responses through the appropriate channels. Always respond to concerns and objections. Always provide feedback to questions that have been asked or any alternative ideas and suggestions that have been put forward. Be open-minded, but keep the communication flowing. Don't shy away from that. Those conversations might be difficult, but ultimately they will be constructive and you will reap the benefits. I think there's a couple of other things around consultation as well, in terms of being prepared to change those original proposals if there is something that you've missed, or if a better idea does emerge at some point. Be visible, be available, keep focused, but keep talking. Be patient. This can take time. And at some stage, it always pays to enter into some joint problem solving. If you hit difficulties, don't think we can solve this on our own. As part of the consultation process, get into that joint problem solving process and see what comes out at the other side. In terms of benefits, you will be working closely with the employees, so the trust tends to remain. It's not eroded. Even if people don't like the outcome, they'll feel as though they've had a voice. They'll feel as though they've been heard. And that can, again, help with the maintaining good employment relations. Spin-offs from that is these people will probably still be working in the organisation once the dust has settled. And there will be questions around things like morale and motivation, productivity, level of service, commitment, and anything that you can do to ensure that people feel more comfortable through the process and like they've had a voice is likely to help when you get to that particular stage. I feel as though I shouldn't really finish on negatives, but there are significant risks of getting this wrong, and it would probably be remiss of me if I didn't talk about what those risks might be. I'm not going to go into detail on these because I'm guessing that Lee or Carrie might talk about these as well, but you could end up facing legal challenges of various different varieties. On a less obvious level, then the chances are if you get this wrong, then you might lose some of the goodwill that exists at the moment, some of that discretionary behaviour that was always there previously, where people were willing and happy to go the extra mile, that might disappear. And they'll do what they're expected to do and nothing more. So there are issues around morale, motivation, commitment, and so on. That will impact on levels of service, productivity, outputs. It may impact on absence levels. It may impact on attrition and turnover. People might vote with their feet and go and work elsewhere where they feel more comfortable and valued. And especially in the current climate, it's difficult to recruit at the moment. It might be hard to replace those valuable, experienced, and well-trained people if they decide to leave. And I think you mentioned earlier, Ian, around reputation. Get this wrong, that can impact on reputation, which will also impact on your ability to recruit. Longer term, people remember. And that trust will be eroded longer term. There may well be employment relations issues. Getting it wrong or cutting corners could be storing up bigger problems. But the Acas guidance that we've mentioned a few times from November last year, some really good practical advice in there. Lots of links to more detailed procedural advice and practical advice. But to end, I think where I started, it's very clear in that advice that fire and rehire is very, very much a last resort, and carefully consider all of the other options before you get anywhere near that.
Mark, that's fantastic. What a great summary, actually. If people were taking bullet point notes, they've probably got the guidance written down. It was an excellent summary, Mark. Thank you very much. I mean, the key messages I've got from that, it's around communication and communication early, and probably, though you maybe didn't say it, but it's there. It's constant communication as well, and it's two-way as well. You've got to have that feedback and listening as well as telling, which is right down to good employment relations, I guess. But Mark, can I just ask you a little bit about trade union involvement and the advantages or disadvantages, as you see, of that in the process? How do we involve trade unions early if they're present in the workplace?
Okay, I think if there is already a good relationship with the trade unions, then it will be simple. It will be straightforward. You can have those conversations at an earlier stage. If those need to be in confidence at that early stage, they can be. But obviously with a view to sharing that information with everyone else as the process develops. I think one of the benefits of trade unions is that they know the process and they will assist in that process. They will have their own communication channels already with membership, so they'll be able to make sure that the consistent message gets across to everybody else, and then they will act as the conduit to bring the information back upwards again, so any concerns, fears, ideas, suggestions can be brought back through those particular channels. One thing I didn't mention that I think I really should have mentioned, if there aren't trade unions present in the workplace, if there isn't an existing employee forum, or if the employee forums haven't been through this particular process previously, then it's always a good idea to provide them with some training. That can head off a number of the issues that might arise otherwise, because it can be frustrating. It's a complex process. And people's behaviours might not be that constructive, but providing the training up front can help prevent any of those behavioural type problems developing.
And it's an investment in that trust that you spoke about, which is absolutely essential, I guess, to this, because we all know that it's easy to lose trust, but very difficult to keep it, but gain it in the first place and then keep it. So, essential all the way through. Get that. Mark, really excellent. I'm sure there'll be questions for you. And just to say, folk, in the bottom right-hand corner or the top right-hand corner, I'm not sure where it'll be on your screen, you'll see a chat function as well as a questions function. If you want to have a chat with other people in the network, just pop something in, say you're there, say hello, connect. If you've got some questions for Mark, Lee, or Carrie, or questions generally about the Charter, just pop them in the questions tab, and then we can get them to the right people. So moving on, Mark, thanks again for that. Carrie, can I turn to you? And there you are, head of people and culture in a large organisation, Peel Land and Property. Undoubtedly, you've had challenges around restructures through the organisation and your time there. But it'd be great to just learn some of your experiences, Carrie, where things have gone right, maybe where things haven't gone so well. If you're willing to share those sorts of things, you always get great lessons.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me today. I give some thought to this and how best to kind of talk about it. And I figured really today, so Mark and Lee are going to be talking more about the kind of process and the legal side of this. So I gave some thought a bit more in terms of my experience, not just at Peel, but other organisations as well, where it has gone right, or it perhaps has taken a bit of a more difficult turn, and really thought about the three things that I've learned, I suppose, going through those processes, and hopefully that people can sort of take something from. So I guess the three things I thought about were kind of consideration, and it's interesting to hear some things Mark said in terms of picking things up at the beginning and really understanding the process that you want to go through, and the why, I guess, you're going through that restructuring process. The second one, communication, two-way communication through the process, etc. And the third one, compassion, which I think sometimes gets a little lost in this. And some of the examples that you gave at the beginning there, Ian, is I think really where some organisations have gone quite wrong in terms of remembering that actually this isn't just a process and a legal position. This is about individuals and people and their lives, and we need to remember that compassion within all of this. So I would say, restructuring is always a challenge. There's a lot of thought that has to go into it, a lot of thought that has to go behind it. But never more so, I would say, than in the past 2 years going through the pandemic. I know certainly from my own perspective, and I'm sure lots of the others on the call today will have gone through restructuring through that period. And moving to a position where obviously remote working, having to go through, in our case, those consultations that we did go through remotely, I personally found incredibly difficult, and perhaps comes back to that compassion point, is I found that very difficult not to be sat directly opposite somebody and just have that human to human contact and conversation. And I think that really made us even more so, certainly at Peel, think about how we approached the whole thing from beginning to end. I think when it goes well, and in some cases we had this, going through the pandemic times, when a colleague says thank you at the end of that process, even if the outcome perhaps wasn't what they originally would have perhaps hoped for, but, it's great that people sometimes do give you that feedback and tell you that actually they feel they've been treated with respect and dignity, and have had the opportunity to have a voice and to share what they wanted to share with us through that consultation process. And absolutely, to Mark's point, sometimes that means us changing our position, and we, have found a different way through something than we perhaps thought. And other times, perhaps it doesn't end so favourably. But I always feel that at least if people feel that they've been respected and listened to through that process, then they should come out the other end, feeling more comfortable. So I guess taking each of those in turn, the considerations, so the upfront piece, the planning, the thought process that the organisation has gone through. I think it's really important that we spend time on that. And, you know, I'm sure, again, like many colleagues on the call will, in HR roles, will have a manager or director that comes to them and goes, oh, we need to do this and we need to do it next week. You know, our role in that, I feel, is to push back on that and make sure that we have taken consideration and time to understand what it is that we're trying to achieve. Is it linked to the business strategy? Is it linked to our business plans? Are we clear on what we're trying to achieve and how we're going to approach it? Being, you know, really clear and sort of thinking that through. Making sure we're prepared, making sure we understand who we're going to communicate with and when and how, you know, and really taking some care and thought behind that. I often hear from other organisations where perhaps there hasn't been a thought process in terms of the order in which you're going to communicate with people about things. And I think that's a real kind of key one for me, because people do get very upset and very frustrated when they perhaps hear something secondhand because it just hasn't been considered how that communication is going to go through the organisation, which then takes me on to that point around communication. So absolutely, to Mark's point, two-way communication through that process, being open, being available, I think is a real key one. You again hear of organisations where perhaps a message is communicated and then the manager disappears for a fortnight on holiday or that kind of thing. I think it's really important to understand how you're going to manage that communication through the whole consultation process, not just with the people impacted, as well with the wider organisation. And, you know, I think certainly in restructures that we've done more recently, that's been sort of a well-considered process in terms of how we make sure that people are aware that there is something going on, either with individuals or with teams, because it does ultimately have an impact on how productive people are during that period and how people are feeling. And sometimes it's just about making people aware that they need to be mindful of their colleagues and how they're feeling as they're going through that process. It's not to say that there's a foregone conclusion at the end of that, but it's about just understanding that people may be feeling a bit more sensitive than they usually would be. You know, and then breaking down the groups that need to be communicated with, making sure that we're kind of clear on who needs to be spoken to in what order. I think that's probably one of the biggest issues, really, is around communication and how open people are through that process. So I'm sure, you know, where things perhaps haven't gone quite so well, that's ultimately what it comes down to, is the communication hasn't been effective. I always say people don't necessarily have to agree with the process you're going through, but what they do need to do is understand it and be quite clear on the process that they're going through. You know, again, as Mark said, around the actual process of consultation, being mindful that the individual going through that doesn't know that process like the organisation does. And so being very you know, clear and giving opportunity to understand that whole process, I think, is really important. And listening to that feedback, you know, making sure that you've given the time and the opportunity. This isn't about sort of racing through a process as quickly as possible. It's about really kind of thinking about what's been said. And then the third point around compassion, you know, I think, yes, we're going through a process, but ultimately these are people. You know, we need to be mindful of all of people's lives that are impacted by the day that you announce that you're going through a restructuring process or a consultation process. People are impacted very differently by that. And I think that's one of the things I think we have done well, is to treat people as individuals as they go through that process, and being mindful of people's different experiences of having gone through consultation, things that people have got going on at home, etc. And, you know, personally, I think when you lose that compassion, you probably shouldn't be working within a HR role anymore. And I know that, you know, I've worked with colleagues in the past who perhaps go through that as a process, and that for me, that isn't what it's about. We have to remember that, you know, the H in HR is human. So, you know, I think that would be one of my kind of key points to everyone, would be, you know, remembering that there is a human being with lots of other things going on in their life at the other end of that. So that really would be my kind of key three things, would be consideration, communication, and compassion. And really just to remember that we can't always get it 100% right either. You know, there's a lot of pressure on the organisation sometimes to get through these things and get them all right. But I think the other thing that you can do is also say sorry sometimes when you do get things wrong, because you can't, you know, nobody's infallible, and sometimes the communication doesn't go quite as you would wish, or, you know, something doesn't quite happen in the right order. And I think it's okay to remember that you can actually say, do you know what, we got that wrong this time, and try and work out a way to resolve it as well. So yes, that would be.
Carrie, that's wonderful. I love the consideration, communication, compassion. I like that sort of, yeah, it's a good memory jogger when you think of the 3 C's. So that's a takeaway for most people, I'm sure, particularly the compassion bit. You've made that case really strongly. I think that's so important. And, you know, the H for human is absolutely bang on. On the communication side, Carrie, because I'm guessing, I don't know, but I'm guessing Peel have got an internal communications team. Or maybe a person that's got internal communications in their role. But working with those professionals, is that something that you've done, that you would advocate? I was struck particularly by the expectations part that you raised there, and particularly, I think in large organizations, the rumor mill, and the impact that the rumor mill can have, because, you know, you're going to deal with the structure over here, but actually the rest of the organization is now on tenterhooks thinking they're next.
Yeah,
they're probably not. But, you know, how do we manage those communications? How have you done that?
I think I always think open and honest is the best way to deal with anything like that. You know, yes, we do have a brand creative and digital team who do support a bit with internal communications, but ultimately it is down to the people and culture team. Most of those comms that go out. I think the important part, like I say, is being honest about it, but also being mindful of when you're communicating. So actually, if there's teams that aren't impacted, let's tell them that they're not impacted. I think often people forget to do that. And like you say, it leaves people kind of hanging on thinking, am I next? What's happening next? So I think it is important to do that. Make sure people understand who is and who isn't impacted by the process that's happening. Sometimes it's difficult to give those complete assurances, because obviously what you don't want to do is set yourself up for a change that's coming in the future and people say, well, you said I wasn't impacted. But I think there's ways and means of how you can get that communication right, for the moment that you're in at that point in time, and give people some assurances that allows the organisation to continue being productive during that time. Otherwise, you can find that things kind of grind to a bit of a halt whilst you're going through that process. Thanks,
Carrie. That's useful insight. I've got another question for you, if you don't mind. And it's around the role of leadership or leaders in these processes. Obviously, you're sitting in an HR position, having to manage that process, and you mentioned, you know, a manager comes in or a director comes in and says, I need that changed and I need it changed tomorrow. Can you tell us a little bit about that pushback, and then how do you facilitate their role in that communication process? The clarity, the vision, I guess, is what we need from leaders around that time.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, it's been about engaging the full leadership team before we embark on any process of restructuring, to make sure that everyone is very clear about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it. So, you know, if I think of the most recent restructuring that we did, that was a very important part of that journey, was just making sure that everyone was fully engaged and understood and agreed. In fact, actually, it's an important one with the process we're about to go through. I'm very much one for sort of documenting things in a certain way before we go into that process as well. So making sure that the leadership team have had sight of, of that document that we're going to go through with anyone impacted. And having that sort of open and honest conversation beforehand to make sure everyone is on the same page, I think is really important. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of pushback, I think a lot of that's to do with the relationship that you have with your leadership team. And, I'm very thankful here at Peel that we've got a great leadership team who, very supportive of one another. So I think, hopefully the pushback isn't too difficult, because we've kind of got a common understanding of how we should do things here.
Thanks, Carrie. That's great. Just wanted to single out that leaders, it's not all on HR's shoulders. It needs to be spread, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah.
We've got a good question from Marie, and I'll come back to it when we've heard from all three of our speakers. But if anyone else has got any other questions that are coming up in their minds as you're listening to Mark and Carrie so far, and Lee in a minute, just pop it in the questions tab, and we'll get to it at the end. So turning to Lee, Lee, we've been working together on legal stuff around good employment for the best part of 2-3 years now. And it's great to have you on the webinar today. Lee, and you wrote a blog for us earlier this year as well around fire and rehire and how to work around it. But also the government on the back of P&O have launched, or I think they've announced, a new statutory code of practice, haven't they, around this? So can you give us some insight into perhaps what's coming and perhaps some of the legal aspects that employers need to be aware of during restructuring processes?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ian. So, I mean, the sort of inspiration for today's talk really did come from P&O, because obviously it was a very newsworthy situation, and of course, reputation damaging for that particular business. But fire and rehire absolutely last resort, and in the P&O case, it was nearly 800 employees who were dismissed without any consultation. So it's a very unusual case. I mean, in my sort of 20 odd years as an employment lawyer, I don't think I've seen a P&O in the past, thankfully. Although, of course, we have seen lots of smaller scale reorganizations or restructuring that has led to dismissals. So it's not something that's entirely uncommon, but not many of them hit the headlines in the same way as P&O. It was interesting to see the government's kind of reaction to all of this, because, of course, I mean, from my point of view, it did highlight the sort of fundamental weaknesses in some ways in employment laws and protection, because if you want to act unlawfully as an employer, and of course good employers is a million miles away from what they want to do, but you generally can, but ultimately the employee then has to bring a claim, to try to claim compensation. Whereas in European countries, if there was a P&O over there, actually the dismissals would have been in not effective at law. So the dismissals in P&O were effective, but it was just that the individuals may have had claims of unfair dismissal or failure to inform and consult. And what P&O were hoping, and in fact what did happen, is that the majority of the employees accepted a compensation deal. And I think the last time I read into this, all but one had accepted, and there was one employee still trying to bring a claim potentially. So, in the UK, it is done differently to sort of European jurisdictions, where those dismissals would have actually been held to be void. So they're still, they're not legally effective. They're still employed. In terms of what's coming, I mean, the government did scramble to, release some press releases, and there was condemnation, wasn't there, of the way that P&O had gone about this, and the CEO was called to the parliamentary committee and given a real grilling on what had gone on. And I think ultimately, having said in the past that they weren't going to pass legislation to outlaw fire and rehire. In fact, that's still the case. It's still going to be available as a method of last resort. But what there will be is a statutory code of practice to with a real firm focus on requiring that consultation, requiring a good business case before you get involved in having to fire and offer people employment on the new contracts. So the statutory code of practice is not yet in place, and we haven't yet seen any proposals on what it's going to look like. Aside from, I think in the announcement there was a statement that actually, if you dismiss somebody whilst not following the statutory code of practice, and they bring a claim of unfair dismissal, the compensation, if you've unreasonably failed to follow the code, the compensation for unfair dismissal will be increased by up to 25%. So again, in some ways, unfortunately, it's still left to the individual to try and bring a claim if they're the victim of fire and rehire. But it's a carrot and stick, isn't it? Because what the statutory code will really say is, the financial penalties for getting it wrong will be, much higher or will be increased. The idea is that, for those employers who are really considering this, they've really got to get it right. And it's, having a good business case, having exhausted all other options, and then if you are going to fire and rehire, it's you've got to sort of follow all those requirements, particularly consultation.
Thanks, Lee. So do we have any clue of the timescale of when this statutory code might be introduced? Have we seen any consultations on it? No?
Unfortunately, Ian, I've not seen anything apart from the initial announcement when it was sort of hitting the headlines. I think the phrase "when parliamentary time allows" has been used.
Sounds like a very soft caveat, doesn't it?
Which may mean it's some time. But I think one of the sort of saving graces of all of this is that because of this sort of very damaging publicity that the case created, I think in some ways it's already kind of having an effect, isn't it? Because most larger employers, in fact, any employer really would really want to avoid that kind of damaging reputational stuff. So I do think it's already kind of having some effect. But the statutory code, I don't know. I mean, hopefully, not too many months away.
Yeah. I'm hoping it's, as you said, Lee, it's not something that good employers should be concerning themselves about. It's about how to do it properly rather than to skirt with fire and rehire. But one of the issues I wanted to raise up maybe with all of you, maybe you've got a view on this, Mark. I think recognize the framework that we will have this as a method of last resort, as you've said. But what's the view, and perhaps it's something that will be taken up in the statutory code, of using it as a negotiation tactic? I think certainly British Gas used that very early on, I think, in what happened last year. So using the threat of fire and rehire as a negotiation tactic. Anybody got a view on that, Mark?
I suppose one of the things that good employers would want to avoid is that intimidating, threatening type behaviour during the consultation process. And maybe it begs the question, was that consultation effective and meaningful if that is hanging around in the background? I don't know what your view would be on that, Lee. Would that damage whether that consultation process, if it becomes a statutory requirement, was truly meaningful and truly effective?
I mean, I think it would, wouldn't it? I mean, it's I suppose in a difficult situation, let's say the potential closure of a business, and you might say that we would have to consider, if we can't agree things, we might have to consider another process, which might involve some job losses or whatever, but we're trying to avoid that. That's one thing, isn't it? But using it as a threat would be, to my mind, completely undermining of the consultation process. And I think, if you are consulting, I mean, there's two different meanings to the word consulting in my sort of experience. One of which is, doing it because it's good practice and trying to engage the workforce and try and get them to, agree the need to make the changes, that's obviously always there. But also there's the legal kind of when the duty to inform and consult arises, where you're proposing 20 or more dismissals in one establishment, and then there are statutory requirements that the consultation must begin in good time. It must be conducted in good faith. And I think if you conducted negotiations with almost kind of like one hand tied behind the employee's back, I do think there'd be a case there where the employees could bring a claim to say, well, actually, the consultation wasn't conducted in good faith, and there could potentially be a claim there. So even if you did actually hold some meetings and on the face of it consulted, you weren't doing it in good faith. So that could be a real issue legally.
That's really interesting. Thanks both for those insights. I'll go to Marie's question. Do you think utilising organisational risk assessments can assist in any restructuring process to alleviate any relevant safety staff worries? So organisational risk assessments to assist in restructuring processes. Anybody got a view on that? Oh, you're all silent. Marie, I will pass on this question to Carrie, Mark, and Lee, and let them think about it, and we'll come back to you, unless you want to type in the box to further clarify the question. Look, we're nearly out of time. We like to run this to about 45 minutes, 50 minutes. Just very quickly, we'll start with you, Carrie. If someone in Greater Manchester today is starting to think about a restructure, one piece of advice, what would you give them?
I think it's the first of my 3 C's, which is consideration. So it's really give some deep thought and have some good conversations within the business about what it is that you're actually trying to achieve. And make sure that that sort of preparation, that upfront preparation, is right.
That's great, Mark.
I think it would be keep talking within. If we've got beyond that stage where we've considered all of the reasons why we're doing this, then keep talking. Even if we hit difficulties, even if we seem like we're so far apart that we're never going to reach agreement, just keep talking for as long as is reasonably practical.
Thanks, Mark. Lee, you've got the short straw. What's left?
I mean, I would say, try and keep it proportioned. Do you really need to make changes to employment contracts? Because there's lots of restructuring where you can actually just agree, that you'll maybe limit it to new starters, or you'll start people off on different contracts. So do you actually need to change existing contracts? Because that takes you into quite difficult territory sometimes legally, and people are quite, jealous of their allowances or pay or whatever it might be. So do you really need to do it? Is there not another way we can kind of try and sort this out without having to go into the legal bits and pieces of changing contracts is what I would say.
Fantastic. That's a great summary from the 3 of you. Marie's come back to us, and she said, in the past, I've used a stress risk assessment process to assist a restructuring process. So I was interested in the panel's view on this, on its helpfulness. Come across that, Mark?
I think it can certainly provide valuable information that should be fed into the consultation process, so that we're fully aware of what the impact of this might be on people.
It comes back to a bit of that compassion, I guess, Carrie, as well, and understanding the community, the workforce that you're dealing with and where they are. Wonderful. Listen, thanks very much, Mark, Carrie, Lee. Really interesting discussion. As always, this will be written up into a blog and published on our website. The webinar itself will be available for you to view and share with colleagues if you want to. Raj, could I have the next slide just to say, there we go, that launching today is Series 3 of the Greater Manchester Good Employment podcast, the Good Employment Chatter. I hope you see what we've done there. So Series 3 is concentrating exclusively on equality, diversity and inclusion issues. And you can see on the slide there Today's episode will cover pay gap reporting, and indeed, picking up on something Lee mentioned, we've actually got a European voice telling us about European practice across the EU on pay gap reporting, which is really quite interesting and very interesting when you compare the UK practice against other parts of Europe. But we cover the other 8 protected characteristics, and finally have a episode specifically on inclusion itself. We've got a range of voices from all sorts of organizations, employers, and policy experts right across the piece. So I hope you want to subscribe. It's a good listen. You'll have to hear my voice in between the really informed people, but that's the price you've got to pay. Thank you so much again, Mark, Lee, Carrie. I hope that was useful for everyone, and see you again next time. Bye-bye.